there's a lot of people who are listening to this and going, well, if you're not going to like just talk to the ad agency and then get the big network buy that's going to go across 40 of your podcasts, like, what are you doing, Matt? Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. And that's providing tools to the podcasters so that they can maximize their advertising potential. Not everybody needs podcast ads in their show. Some are just looking for a grant. And I'll use an example of a podcast that I work with locally here called Humans on Rights. That's a very specific thing that would like to be backed, say, by a foundation or by a corporation that is looking to make headway in the space for human rights. That's your one. That's the one. We don't need to have Tim Hortons commercials going through there any more than we need Citibank running through that. That would just be weird and odd. So we're here to provide the technical solutions so that people can maximize their advertising potential.
Welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, where we get into the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belenke, a podcast and media strategist, specializing in marketing and audience development.
And I'm John Kiernan. I'm a podcast producer, and we're asking the question that's on everyone's mind. Where is the money in podcasting?
Each week, we talk to podcast industry professionals, marketers, and creators who are turning podcasts into a thriving business and making the industry what it is today.
With real revenue, real strategies, and real results.
If you're looking to grow or scale your show, and of course monetize, you're in the right place.
So let's get down to PodBiz.
Today we're speaking with Matt Cundill, founder of the Sound Off Media Company. We'll be getting into the 1 to 2 clients your podcast needs for sponsorship, the 4 main markets in Canada, and what made me absolutely lose my cool when he talked about predictions and things he's excited about in the podcasting industry. Let's get down to PodBiz. Welcome. How's it going?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, straight off the bat, where's the money in podcasting?
That's a great question. It's in many places. So it's small buckets of money. And it's where you find it. The best money you're going to find is going to be the deals that you cut individually with an advertiser or a client or a partner or whoever it is that is really wants to, be a part of your show perhaps, or be a part of anyone else's show. That's always going to be the best one. There's other things, as we know, it could be buy me a coffee. It could be even right down to Contra, where you're making just simple trade for marketing. There's still money in that. So it's small little spots. Programmatic is one that I've really sort of been paying attention to for the last 5 years. And I found it very, very interesting. But there's many, many different levels and many different ways to get your money. So small buckets of money is what I like to call it.
Small buckets of money. We always say go hard on your niche here at PodBiz. So for everybody out there, go hard on your niche and find those small buckets of money. It's interesting also when you're talking about directly working with advertisers and, really utilizing your overall reach, right? The podcast, of course, and your feed and ads within that, whether they're host ad or programmatic or even streamed or baked in, but also what is your social impact? What's your newsletter features, footprint? What is your overall impact of the brand of each show as well?
Small buckets of money also includes taking a look at your inventory. A lot of people who get into podcasting think it's just a mid-roll and a pre-roll and I'm done. But you have a website. You have a newsletter that's very powerful. Often people's newsletters carry more subscribers than your podcast carries. There's space in there. A lot of podcasters don't really know and see where it is. I know I said small piles of money, but you do need to have the one big pile of money. The big pile of money is always going to be the deal that you cut with an advertiser yourself.
Yeah. So not to name names if you're not comfortable, but give us an example of what that deal would look like for you guys. Because at Sound Off, you have quite a few shows, right? You're Canada-centric, and you do work directly with advertisers.
Yeah. For example, I think my podcast was a great example that after 20 episodes, I had a client come to me and said, we really like to be a part of the show. And I was like, oh, lo and behold, here's an advertiser who wants to work directly with me. Well, we worked out a 1-year deal, and then came a second one after that. Every podcaster has a specific client that is going to be the one that is going to provide them with the most money. it doesn't matter if it's part of a network and you've got 9 shows that are all about health and they're grouped up that way. You really do have to sit down. Who's going to be the one? And if there's one, maybe there's 2. And you have to focus on that first, because all the other stuff can come very easily, whether it's getting vast, whether it's getting programmatic, whether it's, using your newsletter to leverage money. All that other stuff exists. But what's the number 1 and what's the number 2 advertiser that you can partner with to get that? So I'd love to say that, we can, cut a deal with an agency house. Agency houses have their own specifics as well. Well, we like that show. Not really sure about that one. It's a health show. We don't believe in those products, but we'll believe in these ones. So, I mean, the advertising agencies also are looking for something specific as well. So the more specific, and there's riches in the niches, that's what you like to tell them, and that's what they like to provide you with, right? Is advertising right into the niches.
That's a really important distinction as well, because brands are going to have specifics that they look for in terms of what shows they like, what guests they like. And it's really about using that discernment when you're talking about where the money is coming in and specifically for what. So in terms of avenues, I think you're right. There are, for any podcasters out there that are independent or with a small network, make a list of like, who's your dream advertiser? I think that's a really big, important step as well. And, even before you reach out, visualize, okay, who would be a good fit for this show? Who would be a good fit for our audience and our demographic?
There's a lot of people who are listening to this and going, well, if you're not going to just talk to the ad agency and then get the big network buy that's going to go across 40 of your podcasts, like, what are you doing, Matt? Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. And that's providing tools to the podcasters so that they can maximize their advertising potential. So not everybody needs podcast ads in their show. Some are just looking for a grant. And I'll use an example of a podcast that I work with locally here called Humans on Rights. That's a very specific thing that would like to be backed, say, by a foundation or by a corporation that is looking to make headway in the space for human rights. That's your one. That's the one. We don't need to have Tim Hortons commercials going through there any more than we need Citibank running through that. That would just be weird and odd. So we're here to provide the technical solutions so that people can maximize their advertising potential.
Yeah, and that brand fit is really everything. Absolutely. Well, Matt, Sound Off does a lot of really cool things, and you are unofficially, or officially, according to Brian Barletta, Captain Canada. So you have a broadcasting background. Tell us a little bit about how you got into podcasting and then how you've built a network of shows.
Started in 2014 by getting let go from radio. So on the 25th anniversary of my starting in radio, I thought they were bringing me a cake. I got a pink slip instead.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. And so from there I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? So I took I said, I'm going to give myself 6 months. Radio and I weren't really getting along. I saw a different future from what they did. They were still about the 30-second commercials. They were really still about getting people to listen terrestrially in the car. And I was like, well, what about these speakers? Are we streaming? How are we connecting with people? And clearly, I was working for a corporation too, which is not a good thing. Corporate and radio do not go together by any means, especially when they're owned by a telephone company or a cable company. So I was a radio first. And so the Sound Off Media Company was founded so that I could do radio consulting. And I picked up a couple jobs very quickly after that. In 2015, it began to slow down a little bit, but by 2016, my interests had changed. And I said, well, really, what's next? And I wound up going to a radio conference. And I found there was still a bit of a buzz about radio, which was great. But what I also found was like, this is great conversation. How do I bottle this so that I can take it home and repurpose it for the next 52 weeks? And it was clearly going to be a podcast. And as it happens, the next week I went to Podcast Movement in Chicago in 2016. And I thought, oh, there's people here with microphones and it's got a really good vibe and people are kind to one another. And it's not like radio where you're trying to cut the other person's knee out from below them and, claw their eye out to steal a share point so we can have an extra $1 million in the market. It was, how do we make this story better? And I looked around and these were all the people who wanted to have an all-night show or an idea that we had cut back from corporate radio. And I said, this is where they all came and this is what they're doing. And the light bulb just totally went off in my head. And I thought to myself, And this is a hockey reference in keeping with my Captain Canada, and that's pond hockey. It's like, I can skate around everybody in this room and keep the puck on the stick. I don't know where the goal is, but when I find it, I'm going to take a shot and see if I can score. Because I felt like I had most of the content creation and the stories and knowing audio down pretty well. And so from that, we started my podcast in June of 2016. So we've been doing that for 9 years, been doing it roughly every week. It started out as the show, the podcast about broadcast. It then morphed into the show about podcast and broadcast. I was really looking for the intersection between radio and podcasting. And I'll tell you, I never found it, because the two are very, very different. I think podcasting has more in common with magazines and blogs than radio. Radio is live and local and now and in the moment, and the presentation's different. The way you speak, it's a headphone listening experience in podcast, a number of differences. But since then, for the last 9 years, we've been doing it. And I thought, oh, I'm going to use this to promote my voiceover business. This will be a good idea. And it's not really what people wanted. What they really wanted was, your show sounds so good. How do I make it like that? I have a problem that you solved. And I was talking about getting an advertiser within the first 20 episodes.
Yeah.
It was a Canadian only advertiser. And I was like, well, people in the States don't need to hear this. How do we change that? And then I got an American advertiser. Well, people in Canada can't even buy this. So how do we change that? And there's dynamic audio insertion. All right, now I'm in. And as somebody who ran a radio network for a while, I totally understand how that works. I understand the technologies. I still find it very difficult to explain to people how DAI works. I leave that to other people who come on my show. I take their clip and I say, just listen to this person right here.
I can explain it. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I just used the clip that Heather Osgood from True Native Media put on my podcast. So I said, this is what it's all about. But that's great. I could keep the Canadian stuff Canadian. I can keep the American stuff American, and we can increase revenue. And with that, I taught a lot of people who came into the space how to do it. And from that, I know how to do audio promos really, really well. Radio, one of the greatest thing radio does is promos. And so, all these sort of tools that I had in my toolbox is what I brought to podcasting to help podcasters grow their business and their podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something where you never necessarily know. Sometimes you know, but sometimes you don't know what's going to hit and what's going to be of value to people. And 2016, having a great sounding podcast, that's a valuable asset when people want to make a podcast and they don't know how. I mean, even now, I'm seeing posts on LinkedIn like, okay, is everybody, if you don't have a home studio or you're not recording from a professional studio, are we all doing the blanket thing, right? Are we all in our closets, right? Like with blankets over our heads trying to muffle the sound. And so I think that, getting that good sound quality is something that people still strive for in 2025. So I think that really does have value. And you never know kind of what's going to hit. And I think also what you said about following your interest, right, is really important. Because if you're doing the work, you've got to love it.
Yeah. So this will mean nothing to the people who are listening to us on audio right now, but I blurred my background because in back of me was a blanket situation for recording.
Yeah.
And I'm still tearing it down.
I told you it was fine, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would beside me, I actually have a brick studio that I wound up purchasing at the Pod Show in London, because it really is about that sound and being able to achieve it. And we could get away with really weak sound or an echoey room if the content was good enough. And for whatever reason, that advice still lingers inside the Facebook groups. And I'm here to tell you that is over. You really do need to have crisp, clean sound in order to put out an audio product, because that's where the bar is and that's the competition that's out there now.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pivot a little bit because it's interesting in terms of monetization and, what you have built with Sound Off Media and how you got into the industry. There is that commonality of finding the right fit, right? I think whether it's, within your own career of, I did this really well and people liked it versus the podcast that you created and the podcasters that you work with at Sound Off, where it's really about everything is not for everyone. And I think that in today's landscape, it can be really easy to get caught up in this person did this, so I have to do this. Or, you know, this person has presence on every single social media, or they're with a big ad network and I need to do that, or I'm not a success. And so I think it's also really important to understand what you are excited about, what you can do, and how to do it well. I mean, when I'm working with a lot of my clients in audience development and marketing and strategy, it's like, don't do what's best for everyone. Do what's best for you, for your show brand, and the audience that you want to develop.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get into podcasting and they don't really know who they're after. Like, why are you doing this? Who's this for? And if you struggle with those two questions, it's going to be a really rough road. And hey, listen, if you've got 20 episodes, actually 17 is the number. 17 is where they sort of like fall off. But if you've got 17 episodes to burn on trying to find your why and who the show is for, I guess that's okay. As long as you pay attention to the data that comes back and you fix it, and then that's kind of the way I started. I said, well, I'm going to start a show. Well, what's it going to be? I think it'll be about radio.
Yeah.
Well, why? Because it's all who really know me, and it's all I really talk about. Okay, that was easy. So we'll just move forward with that one as we go. But there's a lot of people who don't, and I don't know that you can do that anymore and fumble your way to ecstasy. That's a Sarah McLachlan Canadian musician reference right there. In podcasting anymore. I think you do need a trailer. I think you do need to come out of the gate strong. I think your first minute of your show now needs to be solid. We could get away with it before. You can't now.
Absolutely. And, when you're looking at shows that you want to bring on for Sound Off or that you want to partner with, that's definitely a factor, it sounds like. What are some additional factors that you look at when you're looking at shows where you're like, okay, I want to work with them?
Can I help them is the first one. Are they in it for the long haul? And by long haul, it's 3 years. And because it's 3 years to build an audience, doesn't matter if you're a radio station that's starting up down the street, if you're a new morning show launching on Z100, or starting a podcast. It takes 3 years to build an audience, and that comes from Valerie Geller, who's she's just relaunched her book and added to it and updated it.
I love Valerie.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And the book is up on my bookshelf, and she has said it for so long that it takes 3 years to build an audience. I actually asked her why at one point. I said, well, 3 years is about 1,000. It's over 1,000 days, and it takes the human about 1,000 times to really ingrain something into, who and what they're doing.
Yep.
And the last thing I sort of look at with people, and do they want to come on do they want to do a podcast? Is this going to be the number one or number two thing that you're going to do? Because if it's number three, it's going to be too hard and you're not going to be able to do it. If you're going to be able to say, well, I don't know what we're going to do with the podcast this week, give it to Jim. Jim will figure it out. We'll repurpose and do a best of, and, bang off 10 Opus clips, and we feel we've done our homework, and that's not going to be beneficial for anybody. So if it's not the number one or two thing in your marketing plan, it's going to be difficult to get involved. I think also one more thing that a lot of people overlook, and that's the host and the person, and who's the face of the show, what's the personality. And people are like, well, I'm going to host the show, and then but Fred over here is going to be doing all the social work. I'm like, well, you're going to pay Fred to outsource your personality? Who's going to be the one to turn on the camera to be talking directly to listeners, in TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is that you choose? Your show needs to have a personality.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I learned recently, I think probably 2 summers ago, is that you can take a summer break. You can. I for years was like, no, don't do that. But yeah, you can take a summer break, and you can keep your audience engaged on the phone with Instagram reels and just talking to them or going live. Like, you can keep them alive. You come back, hey, your numbers grew. Your numbers actually grew because people were connecting you throughout the summer. So times have changed. It's wild.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important thing to say. You can learn to rest instead of quit.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of podcasters experience pod fade, and there are So many. I mean, they're like blogs, right? There's so many blogs out there, abandoned blogs, right? The graveyard of abandoned blogs and podcasts. And pod fade is real. Counteracting pod fade is real. And, you know, establishing breaks, whether you pre-record and you've got systems in place or you just take a break. I think, the idea that we have to kind of put things out without consideration for our own well-being a lot of the time, or just our own brain power. Sometimes you need space and you need a break to have good quality. It depends on the vertical, right? It depends on the show. It depends on, your own personal life or what you have going on, what other projects you have, right? Like you said, it's got to be number 1 or 2. If it's number 3, it may not get the attention it needs. And
Are
so
you
that's
encouraging me to take a break?
No, I'm encouraging everyone out there to not burn out and quit their shows forever.
Yeah. Well, I haven't taken one in 9 years, and it's something that I am thinking about, but I'd be like, well, I wonder what I'd do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I also think, sometimes that taking a break the audience doesn't even know about because you've like just double recorded and you just have batched everything. I think that's also another great way to do it. But this idea that, that getting stuck in the day-to-day of your show can be overwhelming. Not everyone is going to have a weekly show that they record every single week. Maybe they're going to record 4 in a week, edit the following week, get all the assets in place and take a couple of weeks to just plan and breathe and think. And, I think creativity sometimes comes when we're really under pressure, but it also, if you put too much pressure on creativity, it can kind of limp along in a way where it doesn't have the strength and the stride you would want it to.
Yeah. So I thought I'll never do batch recordings, but now I do batch recordings. I'll do 10 of them and then go to Spain for a couple months. And the reason why I do it is because it's unreliable in Spain.
Yeah.
A place like Malaga is very noisy, and there's just no guarantee that the show is going to work from there.
I think it's also one of those things where, you just got to do what works. And I think that that's different for every creator. I think that's different for every podcast producer and show and network. And so there's a lot of pressure that we all put ourselves under, right? We want to appear professional and we want to be consistent, and especially with audience development. I mean, the number one thing I tell my clients is be consistent, right? Be consistent in your message, be consistent in, the timing of your messages. It's such an important factor. And once you have a show established, there is that ongoing pressure to continue building and, where are things going? But you also have to be realistic. What does your team look like? What does your personal life look like? What are your priorities? And, there's nothing wrong with the batch life.
I'm here for it now.
Yeah. Welcome to the batch life.
Yeah.
Well, what would you say, apart from the batch life, what would you say is one key move or metric or even mindset that's made the biggest impact on your podcasting career with your show, but also with growing your company?
Know how to use the data, know what the data says. And as a program director, we would pore over ratings books to figure out, okay, where are we succeeding? Where are we failing? And how do we change that? Once I started to see what the data was like, I said, oh, I can fix this by making a few changes here and there. So often when a podcaster comes and says, well, I'm number 5 on the Apple charts, and I think I can be successful if I continue to do this. I said, well, do you know how you got to number 5 on the Apple charts? Like, no, I don't. I said, well, what happens is that you have a subject matter that is really very tech, very attractive to the people of this particular region. And a lot of people are using Apple Podcasts to do that. That's how you got to the top of that chart. Let's talk about your audience. So it's not really doing well in a few other places where it could do well. So once I found myself having to teach people often how the numbers come together, what a download is. Did people really listen? I think we should have a sit down and talk about your consumption. And you're only getting to 40% and people are bailing on the show. And it's pretty horrifying. People just want to get it, people get it. I just wanted to do a podcast and this guy is telling me I suck. And I say, well,
here you are telling them Santa Claus isn't real, right?
Yeah.
But they're on the top of the Apple Podcast chart.
Yeah. This is not I'm not here to say that your show sucks for any particular reason, that it's you or your subject matter. However, you didn't need to go on for 4 minutes to start the show giving a recap of their LinkedIn bio. That's not very interesting because I can get that on LinkedIn, right? And I also don't think that, it's necessary to say 4 or 5 times throughout the show. Well, we're going to talk about that later. And just before we wrap up, and we're going to be going soon, but I just wanted to touch on this before we go. You're giving all these cues to listeners for them to leave, right? And sending them elsewhere and driving them away from a good, solid listening experience. And so, if you're going to be interviewing, you're going to need some interview skills, right? And if you're going to be talking, you're going to need some mic skills as well. I can't tell you how many popping peas I've had to deal with over the years. It's incredible. But it's the little things like that all sort of add up, drip, drip, drip. And I said, we want to get you to 80% consumption. And so we'll look at the data that's provided from Apple and Spotify, where you can get those consumption metrics, and settle it down to do a show that is going to have a very fast intro at the beginning. If you want to put the branding there, totally fine. We love that. Get that done. Get your guest on the air as quickly as possible. Get in with the good questions. Just like this interview started, you came out of the gate with the money right away, right? And we want to build towards 80, 90, 100% consumption of your show.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to be doing true crime where everybody wants to find out what happens at the end, it's probably going to be harder to get to 100%.
It's just as scary as true crime.
Yes.
Absolutely. And it's definitely one of those things where all, like you said, that drip, right? That constant drip of so many small factors that make great content. It's fascinating. And I think that, as I call myself a media nerd, I think, when you have a broad skill set like you do, I work in audience development and strategy and marketing. And at the same time, I call myself a media nerd because I just, it's that consumption. And so, when you listen to that much media, you know what sounds good. You know if your attention is lost, everybody else's is as well. And when you're looking at consumption rates, it's very depressing to say to somebody like, hey, this got boring, or hey, you should probably shorten your episodes, right? So
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So audience development is interesting because there's a little extra tier in Canada when people come to me with a show and they're going to say, well, I want to have downloads that's going to be this particular number. I said, well, you're talking about hockey, or you're talking about something that's distinctly Canadian. It could be Tim Hortons coffee. It could be poutine. This is not going to be very exportable. You're not going to have as many Americans listening to this as if you had something that was more of a general story. So a lot of people will look at it and say, oh, I don't have the same downloads as my American counterparts. I said, yeah, you're probably going to have 1/10 the downloads. And I think you're going to need to learn to live with that, especially when it comes to creating stories that are distinctly Canadian. And what's that expression about comparison being a form of evil of some sort?
Comparison is the thief of joy.
Of joy. There you go. You're not going to enjoy yourself if you're always going to be comparing yourself to an American counterpart who just have more people by nature to draw on. At the same time, there are Americans who will ask me and say, why did you put my podcast into JioSaavn in Ghana? And I said, well, because a country like India has 800 million English speakers,
Exactly.
and overall the population is the same as the United States with an additional billion people. So it's just scale. Don't worry about it. It's going to be good.
I think that's a really important thing to consider when we're talking about success. Success looks different for every podcast and every show and every market. And if you have content that's very specific to a niche or a demographic or a geographic location, that doesn't mean that it's less good because it reaches that specific audience. I think that that's a really important distinction. Canada has your own culture and you have your own stories, and they're just as valuable, even if the population is 1/10 the size.
Yeah. And it's even crazier because you said, well, we have our own culture, but there's really, I count about 4 different cultures in Canada.
Yeah, no, of course. But
listen, we have more time zones in the US. So I'll start in the Maritimes, where I started my radio career and went to Acadia University. Shout out to the Axemen. But they have more in common with the people of Boston and Massachusetts and Maine and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, than they really do with Montreal. And Quebec is 8 million French Canadians. That's a different language altogether. In fact, we saw podcasting they don't even call it, they've got their own word for podcasting, by the way. It's called a balado. I'm not even sure where they got the word, but in France, they'll call it a podcast. But in Quebec, c'est un balado. But we saw the number of the amount of podcast listening drop in Quebec, and it's simply supply. There's just not enough people making it in order for them to connect to it. And as well, Quebecers love their YouTube because it's more searchable. They're always looking for stuff in their own language, stuff that's French Canadian, stuff that's Quebecois. You get to Ontario, listen, that's going to be a big audience around Toronto. It's going to be the Greater Toronto area. You've got Ontario, that's 9 million people right in the GTA. So if you're a local name of any sort, you're gonna do very well. Winnipeg is sort of on its own on the prairies along with Saskatchewan, and Alberta, I call it Diet Texas. I mean, it's got oil and it's got conservatives, and
isn't that where they have a stampede? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, stampede time. Population again, it's small. When you group it all together, and British Columbia, has a lot in common with Washington State and Seattle. So culturally, these places do align north-south a little bit, but the population, again, is not big. So if your podcast is going to be exportable, and by that it means it's going to be able to get downloads in the U.S., don't go looking for downloads on this stuff. And I see it. I'll tell you, I see it in the money. And 80% of our programmatic revenue comes from 20% of our downloads that are largely in the United States. So we have a lot of unsold Canadian inventory up here. There's only so much Tim Hortons. There's only so much Bell Mobility. There's only so many of those ads that are going to make it into the podcasts up here. So I'm not here to say that it's a big giant hole, but we've got more inventory than we do advertisers right now in our podcasts.
Absolutely. And what's something people don't know about what you do?
I'd like to think of myself as, very open, but I think a lot of people don't know that I spend a good chunk of my day as a voice artist, and I work from the other side of the podcast side. So there are a few people who go, was that your voice at the beginning of this particular ad? I downloaded a BBC podcast in Canada. So I'm the voice I'm the Canadian voice you might hear that sneaks up and will put the pre-roll in on stuff like that.
A man of many talents. I think it's also great because people don't realize that within audio, within podcasting, you start out maybe as a host or as a voiceover artist, or within broadcasting, you have a different background and you can apply those skills. And most people within podcasting have a pretty wide skill set.
Yeah. I mean, I'm born out of radio, and I was far too radio for far too long. I think I had a harder path to learn about podcasting than others because I had to unlearn, and I'm still unlearning so much of the bad habits about radio. If you go and listen to the first 20 episodes of the Sound Out podcast, it is loud. It is obnoxious. It's not very good. It's a terrible listening experience. I don't delete them to remind myself, that
I think if you ask any podcaster to listen to the first couple episodes, they'll say the same thing.
But these were especially bad. I had to be taken aside by Jeff Schmidt of Wondery, or at least he was working on Wondery ads, and he said, this is just too loud, and it's just booming my ears. You're going to tone it down a little bit. So we did wind up toning it down and creating more of a listening experience for people, one that was going to be suitable in the headphones. And I was listening to some stuff out of Slate and Panoply back in 2016. And I thought, oh, this is just great. I love how this sounds. And eventually I started to steer many of the podcasts into sounding something that could be enjoyable, whether it was in a car, on an airplane, in the earbuds, or simply on a smart speaker. Because these things are consumed so many different ways. And now we've got smart TVs that people are consuming on. So I spend most of my day thinking about how's this going to sound and how can we make it better? But to that, there's still the old radio person in me that's, wants to say that you're listening to 10 in a row in Minocqua, Wisconsin, on Big 98, The Island, which if you're driving through Minocqua, Wisconsin, you will hear my voice.
Shout out to everybody listening to Big 98, The Island.
Yeah.
If you had to start over today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter?
And by grow, do you mean the company or do you mean me personally?
Both.
Travel. I think travel was something that I didn't do when I got let go in 2014. I stayed at home and tried to build it all online. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I probably should have moved at one point. There was an opportunity to go to Los Angeles to, be a voice actor. There were other voice actors. You should audition for this. Video games are a big deal. Come and join. We've got auditions. I was like, I don't know. That could have been an opportunity to go. It really took, I was sort of relying on doing the radio consulting in 2015, but it really took a couple of trips in 2016 for it to just sort of go boom. And those two conferences, one was in Minneapolis. It was called the Conclave. It was a famous radio conference at the time, but just, meeting radio people who were struggling and needed solutions. And then, followed by either the week before or the week after in Chicago, where people were providing the solutions. I thought, this is what we're going to do.
Absolutely. And
get out, travel more, get in front of people. I know we have podcasts. Your podcast needs to grow by getting in front of people. If your show is going to have a conference, if your show is about widgets, go to the widgets conference, get in front of everybody. What do you charge for your ads? I don't know. You're at the widgets conference. What are they charging for the big billboard at the front of the room at the widgets conference? This is the thinking you need to do. And it really does change when you get out in front of people. And what's your best marketing tip to grow your podcast? I always say that it's go up to somebody on the street, ask them if they've listened to your podcast. And if they say no, take their head and push them into the hood of the car and say, now you're going to listen to my podcast like some sort of gangster off The Sopranos. Okay, probably not going to be the most productive and friendly.
The schoolyard bully approach to audience growth.
Yes, but I'm just saying that's the mentality. And I'll give you a subtle example of this, and it's birthdays and Facebook, and there's like 5 or 6 people. You probably had them on the show before, and you go up to Jim. Hey, Jim, you write this on their birthday. Thanks a lot for joining me on the Sound Off podcast recently. It was a great show. Leave the link there. The family's going to download it and connect it with the show. This is all very free. It's a little obnoxious. It's kind of like this guy's coming up and pushing your head in the car and say, you buy this right now and listen to my podcast.
Give me your lunch money and listen to my podcast.
Yeah. But it really, the show took off and things began to take off when I would go to places, conferences, and just provide them with a card and say, hey, why don't you try this show out on your way home?
Yeah.
Right. We're at the widgets conference. Listen to my show about widgets on your flight home or on your drive home. It's so easy. And they remember a face and they think you're doing them a favor. So getting out and getting in front of people is something I wish I'd done more of. And still to this day is probably the best marketing.
Last question. What are you most excited about coming up in podcasting?
All the amazing video products that are going to be going on sale 1 year from now when so many people give up trying to do this video thing. I can't wait to scoop all that up at a discount price.
I love it. I love it so much.
I'm really stuck on this. So going to the podcast show in London.
So
it's true.
I'm dead.
I can't wait. Oh my God. All those products that were on sale at the London, at the podcast show in London.
Yeah. You're ready to get like all the amazing, like 4K, super amazing cameras, thousands of dollar cameras from the bargain bin when people give up on video. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. It's because what's going to happen is you're having all these people who are so focused on the video and again, not focused on the sound. And the sound is really the driver of your show. And you'll notice I said show, right? And yes, people are going to watch it, but more often than not now, if you're uploading the video to Spotify, people need to listen to it as well. And on YouTube, how many people are really like listening instead of watching?
It's definitely about use case. Yeah. I mean, I've had video come up on players and I'm like, no, screen off. I'm on a power walk. Yeah. And so I think you really have to think about the habits of your audience and your listenership. But I do also think that video is going to become more and more relevant. So maybe there won't be as many cameras on the secondhand market in a year.
Yeah. And I'm not going to be the one to sit here and say, no, don't do video. Video's terrible. I'm just here to say that it's a marketing tool more than anything. If I could wear a t-shirt today, I'll get the t-shirt made. It says, I'm only here for the search. Really, when it's video, I'm only here for the search so that you encounter me maybe in an Instagram reel. If you encounter me, that's like a billboard on a highway. You pass a billboard on a highway. That's the form of advertising that is that. And if it happens a couple of times, maybe then you'll come in and check out the show. But I do think that 1 year from now, there's going to be a glut of video equipment that we're going to be able to get at a discount price.
Okay. Well, Matt, thanks for joining us.
Well, if you could just help me off my soapbox so I don't twist my ankle, that'd be great.
I know I'm going to laugh. You just really got me.
Yeah.
Give me a second. John, we're cutting this. John, cut it.
That was a good line.
No, it was great. It was so great. It was so great. Hold on. I'm just really losing my cool. I just have the giggles. It's just such a funny answer. I mean, we're all thinking it, but like, Jesus.
Well, why is nobody saying it?
Because I know the video is going to be successful, right? I think it is something where we're seeing results. And I don't think Instagram is just a billboard. When you're factoring it into sponsor packages, when you're factoring into the overall impression of your show and your brand, I think it does say more than, a passing billboard from your car. And at the same time, I don't think everybody can do everything. I don't think the independent creator can do everything. And so, it's really important to focus on what you want to do, what sells, and what's going to make the biggest impact, whether you have a podcast for your business or you're selling sponsorship on your podcast. So that's an important distinction. I do think that there may be a glut of video equipment available in a year. And I am excited about the prospect, but it's definitely going to be like an interesting time for sure.
Yeah, and it's going to be new creators who are going to part with all that because it's absolutely overwhelming. If we were to just do an audio podcast right now, we have to do a trailer, we got to do artwork, we got to do so much stuff to make sure that this gets off the ground properly.
Yeah.
But if you spend all your time at the beginning just focusing on the video and worrying about the video, that's going to detract from the audio. And at which point you're saying, well, we're going to have to put some of this stuff up for sale.
I think that it's going to be interesting to see how video creators enter the audio space as well. I think that's going to be interesting. And who knows, maybe some deals are in our future. Well, Matt, it has been such a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me, Norma Jean. I really appreciate it.